Hello, it's Duncan. I split our last session into two because, to be honest, I had better things to do than a long editing session in the week before Christmas. So today we'll just pick up where we left off, starting with a little argument with AI Assistant, then adding tests for optional lenses, before checking that, gratifyingly, all our existing lens operations still work. In fact, this behavior makes me wonder whether we need a difference between required and optional at all. If we're going to do that, though, I think maybe we do need a better error message if the property isn't there. So ideally what we like in this case is this message here, key is null. This would then say key no such is null. Obviously it doesn't yet. And now we could do a better job in optional if we knew that result was null but t wasn't nullable. So how do we know if t is nullable? I think we'll ask AI Assistant. Thank you, by the way, to JetBrains for extending my subscription so that we can experiment together. I think I'm going to ask, how can I tell if a Kotlin reified type is nullable or not? Okay then, AI Assistant says, due to type erasure, we cannot check if a reified type parameter is nullable. Well, I don't think we have type erasure because it's reified. So maybe we will dig a little deeper. Isn't erased because this is a reified type. Well, it's adamant, but I'm pretty sure I have seen a way to do this. So, deeply unfashionable though it is, I think I'm off to Stack Overflow. And here is the trick that I thought I remembered. Null is t. And in fact, it looks like I've already upvoted this once, so I suspect it does work. Let's go back to our code. Before we try it, let's just bait AI Assistant. What about null is t? I see where you're going with this. It's so convinced that it's even written a little test for it. Let's try it out. Let's take this from here. Just put it in here for now. And now I'm going to write a little test. Is nullable. I think we'll call this is nullable. And now in here we can say is nullable string question mark and is nullable string. See what we get when we run that. Oh, that's strange. What do we have? Is nullable. This is nullable. Oh, idiot. Let's just say test is nullable. And now run that. It passes. What was the output? True and false. AI Assistant, you are lying to me. But never mind, because we want the behavior to work. So let's get rid of that, that, that. And now we'll come back over here and we will say if result is null and null not is t, then that's our special error case. So we'll take this, put it in here, and this is the thing we wanted to say, which was key is null. Does that work? Now we have a failing test, but let's see where. I just missed the is. So this should say key is null. Wonderful. Now then, I think we can tidy this up by adding an else in here and then converting this to a when. Check that's still good. And it is. We can lift the return out of the when. And now I suspect that we can move this line up there, like that. Good. Okay, then going back to our tests, I think probably that belongs in the happy path. Although in fact maybe we should group these a bit better. So let's group the optional string case according to whether it's a string or a string question mark. If it's a string question mark, then we can return null, otherwise we can't return null and we do throw IllegalState exception. If it is there, obviously we return it, but if it is there and it's the wrong type, then again we throw IllegalState exception, but with a different message. I suppose that for completeness we should see what happens if something actually is null in the map. So I think we could add in here null to null, and in that case it should be like this one. So let's copy this line, put it down here. So if we go looking for null as a string, it's null. That's true. And if we go looking for null as a not string, it can't be null, which means that it must throw, and we expect it to throw with a message like this one. So let's take it back to that thing and put that in there. And this one would be null, and it would say null in there. Is that true? It's still true. And now I'm reading the message key null is a bit weird, so I think this should probably say value for key no such is null. Same thing here, value for key null is null, and the other option is value for key is not the right type. Back over here, and we're just saying value for key is null. Splendid. So I think now that optional covers the behavior of required if we pass in a non-nullable type. So I don't think it is just optional, it's effectively get typed value or something like that. I think I'm going to plump for value of key. So in context, this now says a property set value of string key is equal to such and such. I think that's okay. So this is property set value of. And now I think we're in the position to use value of in our lenses. So if you remember, we were trying to do nullable properties here, and we couldn't do this. Let's back into being able to do it. What I think we'll do is we'll go to our lens, which is here, and I think if we change this to be value of, then there's a good chance that everything will still work. Let's run all those tests. Good. And now then we can relax this any stipulation here. So that can go. That can go. Everything's still fine. Oh. But this is because we've changed the type of the exception here. So we know this is IllegalState exception now because you're using value of rather than required. Is that true? Yes, it is. But now maybe we can reinstate this code. Happy days. I wonder, now that we had the idea of a lens of nullable, whether we can use it to inject. So see, we can get here. What about inject? Let's just play with that. I think we could say a property set dot with a lens and the new value, a value, because there wasn't none there before. We'll call this updated. And if this works, then we expect that updated is equal to not an empty map anymore, but a map of the property name to a value. Is that true? Goodness. And remember that because our lenses have an update function as well, we could also say, no thank you AI assistant, that val updated to is updated. Now we don't have an extension for this yet, so we'll do it by hand. We'll take our lens, which is a lens, and we're going to use update. And that takes a function of string question mark to string question mark. So here we could say we want to update taking the property name of a value and doing it uppercase. This error reminds us that we need to pass the subject, which is updated. And now the type system kicks in and tells us that it could be null because this is this lens is string question mark. So in here we're just going to say question mark uppercase. In that case, updated to is going to be property name to a value, I think. And I'm right. And we should be able to set it back by saying val reverted is updated to dot with a lens and null. And in that case, we won't have an empty map. I suppose we will have property name to null when we look at reverted. Is that true? Yes. But this only goes to point out that we haven't really done a good job with a lens update. What we'd like to say is updated dot update with a lens and a lambda, probably updated, and we can implement that as we did with, so let's go over here and say that updated with would take a lens and a function that takes an R, returns an R, and that would be lens update this and F. Back to where we were. That now compiles, and we're good to go. Now then, I think that if we look at our value of, we'll find that we don't actually have any more use for our required. We'd previously written 3 versions, one that took just one key, one that took a key and some other keys, and one that took a list of keys. These ones are being obsoleted by composing lenses. So here, where we do display name as lens and then text as lens, that's solving the problem that this vararg version of required we're solving. So I think we can get rid of that. And we can get rid of that. And we can get rid of this. Except that it turns out there are a couple of places we're still using one of those. So this can now become value of, as can this one here, and here, and here. I suppose really I should have implemented required in terms of value of and then inlined it, but this in fact reminds me that we actually wrote some tests for property sets, but you don't want to watch me fix this up, so I'll just fade to black. And you're back in the room. Okay, so what I've done is I've migrated our previous property set tests to use our new value of. They're a lot more organized and stringent than the version we had in competition tests. So we check things like string values and int values and list values. We show what happens if we have the wrong type, what happens if we don't have a key for a nullable property, and so on. Shown the sneak peek of this in the last video, Yusuf pointed out that here we don't have to ask whether the result is null. In fact, I think that these are the same test, given the result is t. So in fact, we can remove the more complicated one, this one, and see whether that passes. And it does, and I think we've now got enough tests to show that's a safe thing to do. In fact, there's another thing I'd like to do while we're here, and that's to improve our error message when we don't have a key at all. At the moment, you can see here, it says no key throws for non-null property. So if we start with an empty map, then the error message we get is value for key any is null. But it's not really null, it's not there at all. It would be better if we said key any is missing in the map. That will obviously fail, and does. How do we make it pass? Well, I suppose in here we can see whether it exists or not. So we can say if this contains key, with our message, key is missing in the map, else this one. Is that right? Oh, we seem to have broken another one and not fixed this one yet. Why is that? Ah, we got this the wrong way around. So let's just swap these. Feels like there's a refactor for that I've missed, but let's see whether it works. And it does. Splendid. One last thing, which is that normally maps throw no such element exception. So let's go and change our test to say that this should be no such element exception. Go up and have a look at the others. No key, that should also be a no such element exception. Where are other errors? Wrong type. Now in the case of a wrong type, that's interesting. Is it that our state is wrong, or that we don't have an element with the right type? I'm inclined to keep things consistent and say this should also be no such element exception, that we don't have an element of type int in this case. Any more? No, that's it. Check our tests fail. Unsurprisingly they do, and now we can take this, this and replace it with throw no such element exception to pass. Good. And now this property set required can be deleted. That makes this one also unused. And that makes this one unused. Wonderful. Before we go, maybe we'll act on this little squiggle here to introduce the result as a subject of when, and then move that into the when as well, which makes this a pleasing single expression. Like that. Good. And one last thing, it occurred to me as I was editing the last video, that in our lens, we added this t.get, but we could make that an operator fun. And if we did, and look at the places that we use it, which appears to be nowhere, but I don't believe that. So let's go back to our competition tests and find one. There's one, for example. That would mean we could use indexing rather than the get. So here we could say, replace with the square brackets like that. Another one there. I'm not sure I like that, to be honest with you, but it's an option that I have. I can easily go back. Right then, well that's quite a bit of work spread over 2 episodes, so let's commit that with replace property set required with valueOf and commit that. Good. One issue, property sets is never used, which remains, I think, a bug. I think we have one more nullability issue to address, and that's what happens when we chain things like this. So we have a display name which has some structure and then we get something out of it, text, where this is optional. Let's see what happens if we do that. We've got this as lens at the moment. I'm just going to inline it here and then again. Now I don't know what this is. I think that's a refactoring bug. And now in order to say that this whole node is optional, then we could mark this as property set question mark. The problem now though is that this lens, the right hand side of and then, is expecting a property set to be there, not null. And so this doesn't compile. Getting that to compile and work is an interesting problem that I haven't actually solved yet. So if you want to see whether I can dig myself out of this hole, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you're really keen, you could turn on notifications. Even if you aren't keen though, I think you should buy the book that I wrote in that price called Java to Kotlin Refactoring Guidebook, details of which are in the show notes below. Thanks for watching.